Hello everybody, I'm Ajit K. Mishra, your course instructor for Essential Life Skills. I'm here again with a very important session on creative thinking. You know, I talked about some very interesting aspects of creative thinking in my last session. In this session, you'll learn about benefits of creative thinking and some other aspects, important aspects of creative thinking as well. So let's start with the benefits of creative thinking. You might wonder why I'm talking about creative thinking, why everyone today is talking about creative thinking, why has suddenly creative thinking become so very important? There are reasons. And when I take you to those reasons, you'll gradually realize why creative thinking is so very important. It is important because of certain benefits. Let's start with these benefits. The first benefit is we need creative thinking when we are facing a major problem or issue. And that's a fact. We all know that. No single person can claim not to have any problem in life or any problem around. No one can do that. We all have problems. That's not an issue. That's not a challenge. The challenge is if or whether we know how to overcome that problem, how to address that problem. And that's exactly where creative thinking plays a major role. So when we are facing a major problem or issue and we cannot see an obvious way forward and we are stuck and there is a blind alley, we do not have the road ahead, we are completely blinded. That's exactly where creative thinking comes to our rescue. It helps us. Secondly, at times of change, when it's very, very hard to see what might lie ahead. For example, something is about to change and we don't exactly know what is changing and what lies ahead, and we are in a state of suspense, doubt, that leads to anxiety and sometimes frustration. That's exactly when creative thinking comes to our rescue. So when we do not know what might lie ahead and we want to think about possible scenarios, scenario 1, scenario 2, 3, 4, and multiple scenarios. When we begin to think about the possible scenarios, when we are stuck, we do not know what lies ahead, that's exactly when creative thinking comes to our rescue. When there is a lot of disagreement, conflicting situations about what needs to happen next. Imagine you are working in a team and the team members are debating and there's a lot of disagreement about what needs to be done or what needs to happen next. And there is no compromise which seems possible without a lot of effort, and that's exactly when creative thinking comes to our rescue. Similarly, when we need something new, and we all know this is very, very important. I'm reminded of a wonderful saying by one of England's finest writers, poets, Alfred Tennyson, who once said that the old order changes, yielding place to the new, and God fulfills himself in many ways, lest one good custom should corrupt the world. That's exactly what I mean when I said, whenever we need something new that has not been tried before and we are not sure about it, we have to accept the fact that something that is new today will become old tomorrow. And we must be prepared to invent new things so that the old, however good it may be, doesn't become corrupt. That means it doesn't lose its significance. Before the old loses its significance, we have to innovate. We have to find something new. And that's exactly when creative thinking comes to our rescue. The next is The idea that there are various techniques with which we can practice creative thinking. Most of these ideas are the popular ones like brainstorming, mind mapping, and a variety of other ideas. But I'm not taking them into account in this session because you are probably familiar with those ideas. I'll be talking about some practices, some techniques that are very, very effective and that are very, very innovative. I have picked 3 such techniques for you. Let's start with the first one. This technique is the reframing technique. It's almost like getting a photo reframed. Sometimes we think the photo is important. Some other times we think the frame is very important. The frame is adding value to the photo. And most often we are right when we think so. The frame also adds a great value to the photograph. So when we are stuck, we are bored of watching or seeing that photograph within that frame, we may not like that idea. So we may like to change that frame. Sometimes you try this, you change the frame and suddenly a new perspective towards that particular picture emerges. Reframing is that technique. It's very popularly called the reappraisal technique because reframing opens up creative possibilities. By changing our interpretation of an event, situation, behavior, person, or object. Most often we come across different types of people, object, situations, behavior, and events. And we frame a certain approach towards those things. That might lead to problems. For example, you recently met somebody who behaved with you in a very strange, unacceptable, objectionable manner, and you felt very bad about it. So you begin to think that the person is savage, barbaric, rude, ill-tempered, ill-mannered. You find all these phrases to describe the person. When you're doing that, you are taking into account only that particular exchange, the interaction that happened between you and that person, and that interaction is termed as a bad one. And that's the reason why you have found such expressions to describe that person. When you begin to reappraise or reframe your approach towards a person, it might happen that you do not find the person rude or savage or barbaric. Instead, you find the person struggling with behavioral issues. You may realize that the person is actually struggling with behavioral issues. The problem doesn't lie with the person, the problem lies with one particular aspect, one particular behavioral issue, and the person is struggling with that. So you begin to reframe your attitude or approach towards that person. That's the power of reframing. At the time of crisis, a lot of people get demoralized. They lose hope, they lose optimism. They can see the challenges only, the difficulties only. They do not even think about anything that lies beyond. But there are other people who can find opportunities in such situation. So reframing is all about fine-tuning the perception that we create towards things, objects, or persons. We have to realize that there are certain things that do not change. There are people, there are objects, there are events, they do not change. What can change is only our perception of them. So when we begin to exchange an old frame, that old perception, with a new one, things begin to look very, very different. And that's why reframing is so very important. The next important thing is the creative thinking frames of reference. So there are certain frames of reference for creative thinking. And we need to understand how these frames of reference play a very, very important role and how they can help us understand our creative thinking approaches and how they can help us fine-tune our creative thinking approaches towards our everyday tasks. We often struggle with a variety of problems in our personal and professional lives every day. But we can familiarize ourselves with these frames of reference so that we can respond creatively to these everyday challenges. So let's take a look at these frames of reference. The first frame of reference is meaning. So whenever we try to understand the meaning of something, we need to stop and we can ask this question: what else could this mean? So we generally run away with just one meaning and then we begin to create our perception, our attitude. That may not be a good idea. So whenever we derive a certain meaning, it may be a good idea to ask, what else could this mean? Are there other meanings as well which I'm missing, which I'm not finding at this stage? Let me stop and find those unexplored meanings. That will help. The second is context. Where else could this be useful? For example, you suddenly find something new, something creative. Do not allow that particular discovery to be restricted to the application of one particular situation only. You can think of applying that to multiple situations. Where else could this be useful? The third is learning. What can I learn from this? Every time we learn or we are in a learning situation or learning scenario, we need to ask this question: what can I learn from this? For example, I had a bad interaction with my friend. What can I learn from that bad interaction? Should I call my friend barbaric, savage, rude, unruly? Or should I stop and try to think about it and try to learn something meaningful from that experience? So that's learning. The next one is humor. What is the funny side of it? Sometimes we suddenly lose our cool when it comes to approaching things. Imagine you're taking a bath in the bathroom and suddenly the water goes out. And you have already placed soap everywhere on your body, including your face. How do you feel? It may be that you lose your temper, you begin to shout, yell. But at the same time, if you look at the funnier side of it, you'll probably find the other aspects associated with that. The next is solution. Whenever we find a solution, we need to ask this question: what would I be doing if I had solved the problem? Am I going to jump? I'm going to say Eureka, Eureka. What should I be doing? Can I start doing any of that right now? Just think about that. When you solve a problem, what exactly are you going to do? The next one is silver lining. That means finding opportunities in the face of challenges. We all have to accept the fact that every cloud has a silver lining, and that's the fact. The next one is point of view. How does this look to the other people involved? Which is very, very important. In order to engage in some good, great creative thinking, it's important that I take into account their perspectives, the perspectives of other people around me as well. The final is creative heroes. We all have our creative heroes, our role models, our inspirations. If they are our creative heroes, always imagine, remember what they would be doing, how they would be approaching a situation. So we need to ask this question: how would one of my creative heroes or my creative hero approach this problem? So you become a creative hero yourself and you approach that particular problem in a very creative manner. So these are the 8 very, very important approaches, techniques of creative thinking. The second important technique is developing an insight. So in the context of creative thinking, insight means an idea that appears in the mind as if from nowhere. You suddenly get an idea. You have been struggling with the idea, the challenge, the problem for quite some time, and suddenly from nowhere you find that idea, the answer, the solution to that question or the problem. So that's the kind of insight we suddenly develop, these epiphanic moments with no immediate precedence or conscious thought or effort. Such ideas emerge, and they are generally referred to as the proverbial aha or the eureka moment. So that's insight. Let's take a look at the patterns of creative insight. There are 3 distinct patterns of the creative insight. The first is somebody is working hard to solve a problem. Just imagine that the eureka moment doesn't happen without any sound basis. That is impossible. It must have a sound precedence or basis. That means somebody must be working very, very hard to solve a problem. And somebody must be stuck in something, or somebody must be taking a break. Because whenever we are stuck in something, we have to take a break. That is a good idea. So imagine what Archimedes was doing. He was taking a break in his bathtub when he suddenly found that principle, eureka. And then suddenly a flash of insight brings the solution to the problem. So it's all about allowing oneself to be engaged, allowing oneself to struggle with that problem, that is working hard to solve a problem. And then when somebody is getting stuck in that problem, one must allow oneself to go on a break, and then one can realize that something from nowhere is approaching. So that is the eureka or the aha moment. So there's an example, a very interesting example that comes to us from James Webb Young, an advertising copywriter, who says that there is a 4-step sequence to this particular moment, the eureka moment or the aha moment. The first is gathering knowledge. If you have a problem, if you want to engage in creative thinking, first gather some knowledge about that problem, and then begin to hard think about that problem. And this hard thinking must happen incessantly, without any break, through your sleeps, your dreams, and your wakings. That means when you're sleeping, you're dreaming, and you're waking. It must happen all through. Then you go to the incubation period. Sometimes it's always a good idea to put our problem-solving approaches to the incubation stage. So just allow it to incubate. That means allow it some time to discover itself, find itself, and that will lead to the eureka moment. The 4th stage is the eureka moment, according to James Webb Young. When you have that eureka moment, you can now think of developing the idea yet further, checking its applicability, checking its validity and usefulness. You can think of translating that idea into action now, after that eureka moment. The third most important creative thinking technique is the creative flow. Psychologist Mihai Csikszentmihalyi has talked about this particular flow, which he terms creative flow. When we are completely observed in our work, the outside world seems to melt away. And that's exactly when we can experience the creative flow. That means we are so engrossed, we're so immersed in something, in the task, that everything else around us just melts away, cease to be. And that's exactly when we can experience creative flow. So let's take a look at what Mihai means by creative flow. Mihai has identified or described 9 essential characteristics of the creative flow. The first one is there are clear goals every step of the way. That means we must be clear about our goals. If we go on breaking our goals into multiple goals on our way, it's going to trouble us. So the goal must always be very, very clear all through. The second is there is immediate feedback to our actions. That means whenever we perform an action, we must get an immediate feedback either externally or internally. Am I focused on my goal still, or am I trying to digress or deviate from the main course? So immediate feedback helps us stay focused on our goals. The third, there is a balance between challenge and skills. For example, if we find a task to be easy, we are bored with it. We do not find it challenging. If we find the tasks to be very difficult, we get frustrated. So it's very, very important that we try to strike a balance between the challenge and our skills so that we can fine-tune that particular challenge to our ability. Fourth, action and awareness are merged. It should not be that I'm here, but my mind is elsewhere when I'm focusing on a certain goal. Just imagine an actor in front of a camera or facing the camera. The actor has to get observed in that character. The actor cannot be the person he or she is. So the action and the awareness must get merged. Distractions are excluded from our consciousness. We should not allow ourselves to be distracted. We cannot afford that. And there is no worry of failure. Most often, the fear of failure actually prevents us from focusing on our goals. If we can overcome that fear or worry of failure, we can easily continue to focus on our goals. Self-consciousness disappears. That means what I am, what I am doing, all this begins to disappear gradually. I get so immersed and so engrossed in that. Self-consciousness disappears. So for example, if I'm cooking a dish for my family members, I must be so engrossed in it that I should forget how I look, how I appear. I should be totally immersed in that, in the preparation of that dish. The sense of time becomes distorted. So days, hours seem very, very short-lived. And sometimes a few moments appear to be such a great period. And finally, the activity becomes autotelic. Autotelic means it becomes an end in itself. The activity becomes the end in itself. When that becomes, we are completely immersed in the creative flow. And that's exactly when work becomes fun. Forget the goals, forget the accomplishments, the achievements. The work itself becomes fun. So that's exactly what Mihai means by creative flow. That brings us to the end of this session. In this session, I talked about the benefits of creative thinking. I also talked about some important techniques of creative thinking. I'm sure you have taken note of all these things and you're going to explore them further. I'll meet you again with a new session. Bye-bye.